Beneath it, he could feel the ghost of a boy he once was, a boy whose world was shattered in the sun-baked dust of a Nigerian boarding school. He deleted it immediately. The next morning, another one arrived. This time, there was a single attachment, a grainy photograph of the school's main administrative block, its white paint peeling like sunburnt skin, its windows gaping and black. Below it, a short message: "The foundation is weak, Femi. It needs an architect. It needs you." Emeka wasn't pleading. He was commanding, speaking a language only they shared. Femi tried to ignore the pull, but it was like a physical weight in his chest. Oduduwa College wasn't just a school, it was the site of the happiest years of his life, until a specific traumatic moment stole the joy and replaced it with a hollow ache. He booked a flight to Lagos without telling anyone. The Nigeria that greeted Femi was a symphony of organized chaos, a humid embrace of noise, colour and life that was a stark contrast to London's polished restraint. He found Emeka waiting at the airport, no longer the gangly, boisterous boy he remembered, but a man with a haunted intensity in his eyes. Emeka's embrace was tight, a silent acknowledgement of the chasm of time and unspoken pain that separated them. "I didn't think you'd come," Emeka said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm here," Femi replied, the words feeling foreign and heavy in his mouth. They drove in silence, the landscape shifting from the sprawling metropolis of Lagos to the quieter, more rural roads leading inland. The closer they got to Oduduwa College, the more Femi's polished composure began to fray. He saw flashes of himself and Emeka as boys, racing across these very fields, their laughter swallowed by the wind. He remembered the innocent camaraderie, the shared dreams, the naive belief that their friendship was an unbreakable shield. Oduduwa College stood as a monument to decay. The sprawling campus was a skeleton of its former self, overgrown with weeds, its structures crumbling. The air was thick with the scent of rot and neglect. Femi's trained eye saw nothing but a massive, hopeless project. "The place is falling apart, Emeka," Femi said, his professional assessment betraying his personal dread. "It's a complete wreck." "It's not the building I'm worried about," Emeka said, leading him to his small makeshift office in what was once the principal's quarters. The room was not filled with architectural blueprints or restoration plans. Instead, it was cluttered with old newspapers, faded photographs, and carefully labelled folders. Emeka slid a file across the desk, its edges frayed with age. On the front, in faded blue ink, was a name Femi had not dared to utter in 2 decades: Chike. The blood drained from Femi's face. The memory of Chike was a splinter in his mind, sharp and painful. He had been a small, quiet boy from a poor family, a year younger than them. Chike had a shy smile and an extraordinary talent for drawing. Femi and Emeka were the last people to see him alive. "What is this, Emeka?" Femi's voice was a low growl, laced with a fear he hadn't felt since he was a boy. "This isn't a restoration project, Femi," Emeka said, his gaze unwavering. "It's an excavation. We're not trying to restore the school's glory. We're trying to unearth a hidden crime." Emeka laid out the story, not as an accusation, but as a cold, hard truth. After Chike's disappearance, the school administrators had immediately gone into crisis mode. The official story was that he had run away, overwhelmed by the pressures of boarding life. But Chike's parents, poor and with no connections, knew better. They knew their son would never run away. Their pleas for a proper investigation were met with indifference and eventually silenced by the formidable authority of the school and its wealthy patrons. The case was forgotten, buried beneath the school's spotless reputation. "They covered it up," Emeka said, his voice trembling with a long-held fury. "They silenced his parents. And they silenced us." Femi felt a sick knot of guilt tighten in his gut. He had been a willing participant in that silence. He had convinced himself that it was a choice, made for his own good, a way to move on, to forget the terror and the helplessness. But he had never truly forgotten. The trauma was buried deep, a phantom limb he could never escape. They began their search, a grim pilgrimage through the decaying campus. The old dormitory was a mausoleum of forgotten youth, the infirmary a place of false comfort, the school library once a sanctuary, now a repository of dust. Femi, with his architect's eye, didn't just see the decay, he saw the secrets it held, the hidden spaces, the structural anomalies. He found a locked room in the old science lab, a space that didn't appear on any of the original blueprints. As they picked the lock, Femi's mind spiraled back to that fateful day. It was a clear, scorching afternoon. He and Emeka were practicing football on the field when Chike, his face pale and terrified, had run past them. He had whispered a single frantic sentence. "He's coming." They hadn't understood. They were just boys chasing a ball. Moments later, they saw Vice Principal Adeoye, a man they all respected, walking briskly toward the science lab, a stern expression on his face. Chika was gone. It was the last time they ever saw him. The discovery in the locked room was not a body, but something far more damning. They found a small, hidden safe, rusted with age. Emeka, with a determined grimness, pried it open. Inside were a series of ledgers and a small leather-bound notebook. The ledgers detailed the school's financial records, revealing a series of large, undocumented payments to various families, including Chiki's. The entries were marked with coded notes: final settlement, permanent silence. The notebook, however, was a different story. It was Vice Principal Adeoye's personal journal. The entries in the journal painted a chilling picture. Chike had not run away. He had stumbled upon a secret meeting in the science lab between Vice Principal Adeoye and a number of prominent figures, including a high-ranking politician and the school's headmaster. They weren't talking about academic standards. They were discussing a large-scale embezzlement scheme, using the school's funds and reputation as a front for their illicit activities. Chike, a poor boy with no power, was a liability. Vice Principal Adeoye had orchestrated his disappearance. The betrayal was more than just professional, it was deeply personal. Adeoye, a man who had mentored them, a man who had preached discipline and integrity, had been the architect of this brutal crime and its subsequent cover-up. He had manipulated them, their families, and the entire system to protect himself. He had convinced them to stay silent, promising that any further questions would only bring shame and trouble upon them. He had exploited their youth, their respect, and their fear. Femi felt a surge of cold fury, but also a wave of gut-wrenching shame. He had been too afraid to challenge Adeoye then. He had accepted the official story, allowing the truth to be buried. He had silenced his own conscience. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on him. Emeka's anger was a live wire, sharp and dangerous. He wanted justice to expose Adeoye for the monster he was. Femi, for the first time in his life, found himself wanting the same. They tracked down Adeoye, now a retired, well-respected elder living in a luxurious estate. He was a frail man, but his eyes still held the same glint of cunning and authority. When they confronted him with the ledgers and the journal, he did not deny it. He simply smiled a slow, knowing smile. "I did what I had to do," he said, his voice thin but steady. Chike was a mistake, a small boy from a forgotten family. His life was worth less than the future of this school, than my future. "His life was worth more than all of this," Emeka retorted, his voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "And what good would it have done?" Adeoye asked, a cynical sneer on his face. "You would have spoken out. Your families would have been ruined. You would have been martyrs for nothing. You would have been forgotten just like him. I gave you a choice. I gave you a chance to have a future." Adeoye's words were a brutal truth. He had known their weakness, their fear, and he had preyed on it. He had offered them a way out, a path to success. in exchange for their silence, and they had taken it. "You took away our right to choose," Femi said, his voice a low, controlled tremble. "You didn't give us a chance. You broke us. You broke all of us." They left Adeoye to his luxurious prison of a life, his legacy a house of lies. The final confrontation was not a victory, but a moment of devastating clarity. The silence had not protected them. It had eaten away at their souls. It had created a chasm in Femi's heart and a burning obsession in Emeka's. The trauma had not been an external event, but a self-inflicted wound born of inaction and fear. They returned to Oduduwa College, not as architects or detectives, but as two friends sharing a burden they had finally dared to face. The school, in its decay, was no longer a symbol of their broken past, but a testament to what they had lost and, more importantly, what they had found. They had not been able to save Chike or his family, but they had found the truth. They had given his ghost a name and a story. The conversation was secretly recorded by Femi and taken to the appropriate authority who investigated the case further. Adeoye was arrested even though he is now quite old, along with other culprits who are still alive and involved in the crime. They spent the rest of their life and days in the prison, in regret and lonely, till they died. The school was flagged by government and carefully monitored to ensure that such crime is not repeated again. As the news spread over the media, lots of parents began to withdraw their kids from the school to avoid being a victim someday. Femi looked at Emeka, at the man who had never stopped fighting, and a profound sense of gratitude and sorrow washed over him. The guilt was still there, but it was no longer a silent weight. It was a memory to be lived with, a scar that would remind them of the true cost of silence. As Femi prepared to fly back to London, he knew his world of glass and steel was no longer a fortress. It was a testament to his own resilience, a monument he had built on a foundation of unacknowledged pain. He was no longer a boy running from his past. He was a man who had faced his demons, who had chosen to listen to the whisper of a forgotten name. The journey back to London would not be a flight from the past, but a bridge to a future where he could finally build with honesty, a future where the past was no longer buried, but finally at peace. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment below to tell us what you think about the story. The sun, a tired orange disk, bled into the horizon, casting long skeletal shadows across the dust-choked streets of Oke-Afah. For Tunde, the familiar tranquility of the evening was a balm. At 29, his life was a simple, well-worn fabric woven from the threads of his small tailoring shop, the laughter of his younger sister, and the quiet pride of his aging mother. He was content. The arrival of the black Mercedes-Benz was as out of place as a leopard in a henhouse. It glided to a halt before his shop, a silent predator. From its depths emerged three figures, their agbadas a testament to their wealth and status, their faces stern, unreadable masks. The air around them thrummed with an energy Tunde had only ever seen on television. They introduced themselves as a delegation from the Olowu chieftaincy family. Tunde had heard the name, of course. Who hadn't? The Olowus were legends, their wealth whispered about in hushed, reverent tones. The spokesman, a man with a face like a carved Iroko tree, delivered the news with the detached precision of a surgeon. "We have reason to believe, Tunde, that you are the last surviving heir to the Olowu throne. Your father, our late cousin, was never truly disowned. He simply chose a different path." Tunde's mother, Iya Ife, staggered back, a hand flying to her mouth. "What nonsense is this?" she cried, her voice trembling. "My husband told me nothing of this." "We apologize for the abruptness," the spokesman said, his gaze fixed on Tunde. "But time is of the essence." We must insist you return with us to the family compound, immediately. Tundi stood, stunned, his life fracturing around him. The Olowu throne? A king? It was the stuff of fairy tales, not the reality of a tailor from Oka-Afa. Yet, there was an undeniable gravity to their presence, a truth so colossal it bent the air. With a final tearful hug from his mother and sister, Tunde stepped into the Benz, leaving his humble life behind for a world he couldn't possibly comprehend. The Olowu family compound was less a house and more a sprawling, oppressive kingdom. The mansion itself was a grotesque masterpiece of colonial and traditional architecture, its walls thick with the dust of centuries. Inside, the silence was a living thing, punctuated only by the rustle of silk and the soft padding of servants' feet. Priceless artifacts filled every corner, but their beauty was overshadowed by a menacing aura. The whispers, faint at first, grew bolder, a chorus of cold, disembodied voices that seemed to slither from the shadows. He was introduced to his remaining family, 2 older cousins, Chief Demola and Chief Bola. Demola was a man of immense girth and a smile that never reached his eyes, a snake cloaked in a velvet jacket. Bola, his wife, was a hawk-faced woman with a razor-sharp tongue and a calculating gaze. Their greeting was a chilling performance of false warmth, a thinly veiled animosity that prickled Tunde's skin. He was not a long-lost cousin. He was an interloper. A threat. So, the street boy has finally come to claim his inheritance, Demola sneered one evening, his words laced with venom. I hope you enjoy it while it lasts. Tunde's heart hammered against his ribs. It was then that the other shoe dropped. The curse. The whispered legend that had plagued the Olowu family for centuries. Every heir, without fail, had died before their 30th birthday. Tunde was 29. He had less than a year. The emotional weight of the revelation was a crushing burden. He wasn't just a king in waiting. He was a condemned man. The whispers in the mansion now seemed to hold a terrifying new meaning, a countdown to his demise. His nights became a tapestry of chilling dreams, of suffocating shadows and faceless figures reaching for him. Sleep was a luxury he could no longer afford. His days were a different kind of prison. His cousins, in their subtle, poisonous ways, sought to undermine him, to hasten his end. Demola would regale him with stories of past heirs, each tale more macabre than the last, his eyes gleaming with a sick pleasure. Bola would offer him food and drink, a smile pasted on her lips, her gaze a question he dared not answer. He became a man on high alert, his senses honed by a primal need to survive. He was not alone in his fear. The household staff, from the elderly butler Pa Johnson to the young housemaid Sade, moved with a palpable apprehension. They saw him not as their future king, but as the next victim. Sade, a girl with eyes as deep and sorrowful as a midnight sky, would leave him plates of food from the kitchen, a silent warning against the poisoned meals from the main dining hall. One evening, unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere, Tunde wandered into a forgotten wing of the mansion. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. A single ray of moonlight sliced through a grimy window, illuminating a large, dusty mahogany desk. He found it there, tucked away in a hidden compartment, a leather-bound diary, its pages brittle with age. The name on the cover was his great-grandfather's, Oba Okikiola Olowu. Tunde's hands trembled as he opened it. The ink was faded, but the words were a punch to the gut. The diary was not a historical record. It was a confession. Oba Okikiola wrote of his insatiable greed, of a neighbouring village, Igbo Owu, whose lands were rich with resources. He and his brothers, coveting the land, had staged a brutal massacre, wiping out the entire village, their innocent blood staining the soil. The Olowu wealth, it turned out, was not a blessing but a curse. The curse was not a magical hex. It was the spiritual consequence of a blood debt. The ancestors of Igbo Owu, wronged and betrayed, had invoked a powerful spiritual justice. For every drop of blood spilled, Oba Okikiola had written in a trembling hand, a life will be taken from our own, until the debt is paid in full. The firstborn son will die before his 30th year. Tunda's world, already turned on its head, spun into a dizzying chaos. He was not a victim of a mythical curse, he was a descendant of murderers. His lineage, once a source of potential pride, was now a chain that bound him to a terrible legacy. The mansion, with its priceless artifacts and menacing whispers, was a tomb built on a foundation of blood and lies. The whispers were the cries of the dead, a chorus of vengeful spirits demanding their pound of flesh. He was faced with a horrifying choice. He could do nothing, accept his fate, and become another footnote in the Olowu family's bloody history. Or he could expose the truth, dismantle the very foundation of the Olowu legacy, and risk destroying everything his family, his new family, held dear. His newfound wealth was a lie, a gilded cage. To claim it was to become an accomplice in a centuries-old crime. He confided in Sede, who listened with a quiet, knowing solemnity. Her grandmother, she revealed, was a survivor of the Igbo Owu massacre, a child who had been hidden away and raised in secret. The curse was a bedtime story in her family, a grim tale of the powerful getting their comeuppance. Her empathy was a lifeline, a shared burden that made the terrifying choice a little less lonely. Tunda knew he couldn't stay. To do so would be to betray not just his own moral compass, but the very essence of justice. He would not be another link in this chain of generational sin. The wealth meant nothing if it was built on a foundation of lies and murder. He planned his escape. He would find a way to make the diary public, to expose the truth and shatter the Olowu myth. He would use his inheritance not to build upon the family's legacy of greed, but to rebuild a small part of what was lost. He would find the descendants of the survivors of Igbo Owu and offer them a form of restitution, a small penance for a great sin. He knew his cousins would not let him leave easily. His decision to expose their family's dark past would be seen as an ultimate betrayal. They would do anything to stop him. He had to be smarter, faster, and one step ahead. The suspense mounted with each passing day. The countdown to his 30th birthday was now a race against time, not just for his life, but for the very soul of his family. The quiet man from Oka Arthur was no longer just Tunda the tailor. He was a man with a purpose, a man willing to sacrifice a kingdom to reclaim his humanity. The story had just begun. Thank you for watching. Please stay glued to the channel and watch out for part 2. The oppressive silence of the Olowu mansion was a cloak of death, but for Tunda, it was also a canvas for a desperate plan. He had to expose the truth of the blood debt, a truth that was a death sentence for his family's legacy and a lifeline for his own survival. He trusted only one person, Sade, the quiet housemaid whose eyes held the pain of generations. "They're watching my every move," Tunde whispered to her in the cavernous kitchen one evening, the only time they could speak without being overheard. "I can't just walk out with the diary." Sade's hands, nimble and sure, continued to chop vegetables. "You don't have to, sir," she replied, her voice a low murmur. "We can make copies." The old printing room in the West Wing. It's rarely used. The idea was brilliant, simple, and audacious. That night, under the cover of darkness and the menacing whispers of the mansion, they worked. Tunda and Sada were a symphony of furtive movements and hushed breaths. He photocopied the fragile pages of his great-grandfather's diary, the crinkling sound of the paper a terrifyingly loud report in the dead of night. Each page was a confession, a step closer to his salvation, and a betrayal of the family he was supposed to lead. Meanwhile, in the plush, suffocating opulence of their private quarters, Chief Damola and Chief Bola plotted. Their carefully crafted smiles had long since slipped, replaced by a venomous rage. Tunde was not just an heir, he was a walking, breathing obstacle to their ambition. Damola paced the room, a caged beast. "He's getting too comfortable," he spat. "He's been snooping in the old wing. He knows something." "The curse will take him soon enough," Bola said, her eyes narrowed. "Just be patient." "Patience is for the weak, my dear," Damola countered, a sinister glint in his eye. "Why wait for a curse when we can ensure it? A little accident, a moment of clumsiness. No one would suspect a thing." They concocted a plan to poison Tunde's food, a tasteless, odorless substance that would mimic the symptoms of the curse, a swift and painless end that would leave no trace. They enlisted the help of one of the kitchen staff, a man indebted to Damola. The next morning the air was thick with a new, sharper tension. Tunde, armed with a hidden stack of photocopies, felt the weight of his mission. He had to deliver the copies to a trusted lawyer, a man outside the Olowu's web of influence, to ensure the truth saw the light of day. But his cousins, sensing his urgency, were a tightening noose. At lunch, Tunde found his plate laden with his favourite Nigerian dish, pounded yam and egusi soup. It looked delicious, but a flicker of doubt, born from his conversation with Said, stopped him. He picked up his spoon, feigning an appetite, his eyes darting to the kitchen door. Said appeared, her face a mask of concern. She stumbled slightly, a small, controlled fall, and in the moment before she righted herself, she mouthed a single word. "Don't." Tunde's heart seized. He pushed the plate away, a feigned sigh of disappointment. "I'm not feeling well," he said, rising from the table. "I'll eat later." Damola's smile tightened, a slash of white against his dark skin. "Are you all right, dear cousin? Perhaps the stress is getting to you." Tunde retreated to his room, his mind racing. They had tried to poison him. The curse was not a myth. It was a convenient excuse. The Olowu family was a gilded prison, and his cousins were his jailers, eager to see him in a grave of their making. That night, Tunde moved. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. He had the photocopies, but he needed a way to escape without arousing suspicion. His plan was reckless, a desperate gambit. He packed a small bag, slipped out of his window, and navigated the sprawling, menacing grounds of the mansion. The whispers in the air seemed to shriek, a chorus of spectral voices urging him on. He scaled the high, ornate iron gate, his hands raw from the cold metal. He landed on the other side, a free man, but a man hunted. He ran through the dark streets of the city, a stranger in a land he was supposed to rule. He found a payphone and called a taxi, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had to get to the lawyer's office before dawn. He made it, bruised and exhausted, and handed the copies to the lawyer, a man named Mr. Femi. Tunde recounted his story, the words pouring out in a torrent. Mr. Femi listened, his face grim, the weight of the Olowu legacy a heavy presence even in his quiet office. "This is an incredibly dangerous game you are playing, Tunde," Mr. Femi said, his voice low. "The Olowu family has a long reach. They will not let this truth see the light of day. They will not let you live to see it." Tunde knew. He was no longer just a tailor, no longer just a victim. He was a revolutionary, a man fighting for the soul of his family. He had traded a life of comfort for a life on the run, a throne for a conscience. He knew he was being hunted, and his only hope was that the truth would move faster than his pursuers. He was a king without a kingdom, a fugitive with a legacy of blood, and the clock was still ticking. The curse, he now understood, was not a supernatural entity, but the rot of greed and betrayal that festered within the Olowu family itself. He had broken free of the gilded cage, but his fight was just beginning. The question was no longer if he would die, but if he would live long enough to ensure his family's sins were not buried with him. He couldn't rely on the local police, who were more than likely in the Olowu family's pocket. He needed a different path, a public platform that couldn't be silenced. He remembered a story Pa Johnson had told him about a young, fearless journalist named Amara, who had recently exposed a major corruption scandal involving a high-ranking politician. She was known for her integrity and her refusal to be intimidated. She was his only hope. His plan was simple, yet fraught with danger. He would meet Amara in secret, hand over the diary, and pray she was brave enough to tell his story. The thought of it filled him with a cold dread. He was a simple man, not a hero. But the faces of the Igbo Owu villagers, the victims whose cries echoed in the mansion's whispers, gave him strength. He couldn't die knowing he had the chance to right a terrible wrong and chose to run. The next morning, Tunda feigned illness, his face pale and his body trembling, a performance that was half acting, half genuine fear. Demola and Bola, ever the vultures, hovered around him, their eyes glinting with a mix of suspicion and morbid curiosity. "The curse, I believe, is upon him," Bola said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Pity." He seemed so promising. This gave Tunda the window he needed. While they were busy discussing funeral arrangements and the succession, he slipped out the back of the mansion, dressed in a simple kaftan and a faded cap, a ghost in his own house. Sade, ever vigilant, was waiting for him at the gates. "Master Tunda," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear, "be careful. They have men watching the roads." "I know," he said, pressing a wad of cash into her hand. "If I don't make it back, this is for you. And tell Pa Johnson. Thank you." He took a cab to a discreet coffee shop in a bustling part of the city, a place he had arranged to meet Amara through a series of coded messages. The coffee shop was a stark contrast to the mansion, vibrant, noisy, and full of life. It felt like a different world, a world where a man's life wasn't measured in months. Amara was even more striking in person than her pictures. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, seemed to take in every detail. She listened to his story, her expression shifting from polite skepticism to rapt attention as he spoke of the curse, the mansion, and his jealous cousins. When he placed the diary on the table, its pages now open to a passage about the massacre, her skepticism vanished. She was a journalist, and this was the story of a lifetime. This is unbelievable," she said, her voice a low, reverent whisper. "This is not just a story, Tunde. This is history. We have to be careful. They will come for you. And for me." "I know," he said, his voice firm. "But the truth must come out. It's the only way to stop this curse." Amara promised to get to work immediately to corroborate the story and prepare an exposé that would shake the entire nation. As he left the coffee shop, a weight lifted from his shoulders. The truth was no longer his burden alone. The journey back to the mansion was a tense, nerve-wracking affair. He was certain they had discovered his absence. He was a fugitive in his own home. As he approached the compound, his heart hammered against his ribs. The gates were open and the lights were on, but an eerie silence had fallen over the grounds. He found Pa Johnson waiting for him at the back entrance, his face a mask of terror. "Master Tundi, you have to run. They know you left. They know." Before he could answer, a hand clamped down on his shoulder. It was Demola, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. "You thought you could sneak out, you street rat? You thought you could betray us?" he spat, his breath reeking of whiskey. Behind him, Bola emerged, a cold, calculating smile on her lips. "He's not just a threat to the throne, my dear husband. He's a threat to everything we are, the family name, the legacy. It all dies with him." Tunda, his mind racing, tried to break free, but Demola's grip was like a vice. He was no match for the man's immense strength. They dragged him into the mansion, the menacing whispers in the air now a cacophony of triumphant jeers. They took him to the central hall, a cavernous space filled with ancestral portraits. The faces of past Olowus, their eyes cold and judgmental, stared down at him. Demola pushed him into a chair, his eyes fixed on the pouch around Tunde's neck. "Give me the diary!" he snarled. Tunde shook his head, a single act of defiance. "No, the truth is out. You can't stop it." Demola laughed, a short, bitter sound. "The truth? What truth? We will say you were delusional, that you imagined a curse. You are a dying man, Tunde. No one will believe a dead man's story." "But I'm not dead yet," Tunde said, his voice trembling but firm. Demola's laughter died in his throat. He motioned to Bola, who produced a large, ornate, golden cup. "A final toast, my dear cousin. To the end of the Olowu curse, and the beginning of my reign." Tunde's stomach plummeted. This was it, the final act. He looked at the faces in the portraits, the faces of his ancestors, and for the first time, he saw not a noble lineage, but a parade of murderers. He was ready to die, but he would not do so without a final act of rebellion. Just as Bola reached out to force the cup to his lips, a loud, insistent knocking echoed through the mansion. The sound was so jarring, so out of place, that Demola and Bola froze. "Who is it?" Bola hissed, her eyes wide with alarm. Pa Johnson, his face a mix of fear and grim satisfaction, entered the hall. "It is a reporter, Chief. A Miss Amara. She says she has an appointment." Demola's face contorted with fury. "A reporter? At this hour? Send her away." "It is too late, sir," Pa Johnson said, a small, triumphant smile playing on his lips. "She says she already has everything she needs, but she wanted to verify something with Master Tunde." Demola's face drained of colour. He looked at Tunde, then at the golden cup in Bola's hands, then back at the door. Your friend is here with the evidence. We could end both of you here." As Demola smiled with a feeling of victory. Amara walked in, her camera held high, the flash a blinding bolt of lightning that seemed to expose the dark secrets of the mansion. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the quiet hum of her camera as she began to record. As Demola tried to attack Amara, groups of policemen, including troops of army personnel, drove into the compound. Incidentally, the lawyer, Mr. Femi, had taken the case up to a close friend in a top government position, with copies supporting of evidence given to him by Tunde earlier. Demola, defeated, lowered his hand. The game was over. Tunde had gambled everything, and he had won. He was alive. The curse was broken, not by magic or fate, but by a simple act of courage. He had chosen to expose the truth to reclaim his humanity from a bloodline that had been a prison for centuries. Demola and Bola were arrested, and the world shook as the news of the Olowu's hidden crime broke into every media space. Tunde became the new king and married the Sade, the granddaughter of the last survivor of the Igbo Owu massacre. The community celebrated Tunde not only for being their new ruler, but putting an end to a generational curse which had taken ages. The emotional weight of his journey had not broken him. It had forged him into something new, something stronger. He was no longer just the tailor from Okafor, nor was he the last Olowu heir. He was a man who had faced death and found life, a man who had turned a curse into a legacy of hope and justice. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment below to tell us what you think about the story. Azay Oil and Gas was a towering testament to ambition in the sweltering, relentless energy of Lagos. Its headquarters, a majestic 60-floor edifice of polished granite and reflective blue glass, was known informally by city dwellers as the Azimuth. It was a place where fortunes spun and destinies were forged, a corporate cathedral of wealth that stood defiantly against the urban sprawl. Inside, the atmosphere was one of silent, air-conditioned efficiency, smelling faintly of imported leather, high-grade mahogany, and the intoxicating promise of massive oil returns. The people who worked here were the Nigerian elite, their lives as impeccably curated as the artwork in the executive lounges. At the very peak of this monolith sat Chief Alistair Zane, the founder and CEO. A man whose presence commanded immediate deference, he moved with the assured confidence of a true titan. His bespoke suits and quiet, authoritative voice were symbols of a legacy he had built from nothing. He believed in merit, drive, and the tangible power of money, never once contemplating the invisible forces that governed human affairs. But in the deep, silent hours, when the city's frantic pace slowed to a weary thrum, the tower belonged to Vespera. Vespera was the late-night cleaner, a figure so designed for invisibility that she barely registered in the security logbooks. She wore the standard faded uniform provided by the facilities management contractor, moving with a silent, almost gliding efficiency. Her face was plain, her features instantly forgettable, and her large, dark eyes seemed to possess a strange quality. They absorbed light rather than reflecting it. No one at AZ Oil and Gas remembered hiring her, and no one ever stopped to inquire about her background. She simply was the night custodian. Vespera, however, was not human. She was a spiritual emissary, dispatched from a realm of deep, suffocating malice. Her purpose was not simple theft or sabotage. It was the total spiritual, emotional, and financial destruction of every single soul within the AZ Oil and Gas Tower. Her mission was to dismantle their destinies, making the great corporate machine crumble from the inside out. Vespera's ritual began precisely at 2:45 a.m., a time the Yoruba call Oju Orun Ti Fesun, when the veil between the two worlds is thinnest. While the security guards in the lobby watched blurry Nollywood reruns, Vespera began her silent, dark pilgrimage through the floors. Her tools were simple but lethal: a worn cotton rag and a bucket of water that was unnaturally cold and thick with a spiritual residue, a distillate of failure, envy, and despair, harvested from generations of broken dreams. Every piece of office furniture was a personal anchor point, linking the user's spirit to their career and destiny. She would start her work not by cleaning but by consecrating to chaos. On the 45th floor, she approached the chair of Mr. Segun Adekunle, the Chief Operating Officer. Segun had a home life admired across the company, a solid, loving marriage to a successful professional. Vespera whispered the chilling incantation of the curse of unnecessary discord as she wiped the armrests of his executive chair with the foul, cold water. The spell was designed to turn Segun's quiet domestic peace into a continuous grinding friction. When Segun sat on that chair each morning, the curse would affix itself to his spirit of peace. He would go home, utterly unaware, and find his wife's loving presence suddenly grating, her smallest questions interpreted as challenges, and trivial issues escalating into screaming matches of blinding, irrational fury. The goal was to shatter his peace, distract his mind, and ruin the foundation of his confidence. Next, Vespera moved to the desk of Nyosi Okafor, the sharp-witted financial controller. Nyosi was a diligent, cautious saver, building a solid financial future. Vespera applied the hex of the vanishing purse to the slick surface of Ngosi's desk and the seat of her modern mesh chair. This spell was a form of spiritual confusion designed to target her economic sanity. When Ngozi received her impressive salary alert, a sudden blinding fog of financial recklessness would descend. She would start making impulsive, high-cost purchases, investments that instantly went sour, expensive clothes she didn't need, and ill-advised loans to distant relatives, all in a haze of urgent, inexplicable spending. Her money wasn't stolen, it was mismanaged in a trance, leaving Ngozi perpetually ashamed, stressed, and in a cycle of deepening debt. Wahala. The fear and instability bled directly into her oversight of company accounts. Finally, for the ambitious mid-level managers and executives like Tunde Lawal, the director of procurement, Vespera deployed the shadow of stagnation and sickness. Tunde was vibrant and competitive. Vespera deliberately left a small, near-invisible smudge of the dark water on his keyboard and the lumbar support of his chair. The spell was a spiritual inhibitor. It would dull his once sharp intellect, making him chronically indecisive and slow. Compounded with this was a mysterious curse of debilitating fatigue, a non-diagnosable illness that left him weak, feverish, and mentally blank. Tunde would spend more time out of the office on medical leave or struggling to concentrate than actually working, setting him on a fast track toward termination due to underperformance. Vespera repeated this meticulous, destructive process across all operational floors. Some staff, targeted with deeper malice, developed terminal, unexplainable illnesses. The once vibrant AZ Oil and Gas was being slowly choked by an invisible, meticulously woven web of spiritual destruction. The ultimate target was the head of the organization, Chief Alistair Zane. His downfall was necessary for the complete collapse of the company. Vespera had already primed him with a spirit of uncontrollable lust and an overblown sense of entitlement that grew from his immense power. One late Tuesday evening, Vespera waited until most staff had departed. She approached the chief's expansive suite, carrying her bucket and an expression of manufactured, tearful desperation. She knew the chief's vanity would be the key. "Chief Zane, sir," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to sound fragile and near breaking. "I apologize for this intrusion. I am in a crisis. My father is severely ill in the village, and I need a very large sum for emergency treatment by tomorrow morning. Please, I know this is improper, but you are the only person with the power to help me." Alistair Zane looked at the small, desperate cleaner. The lust Vespera had cast earlier surged, overpowering his conscience. He saw an object of power, a validation of his own dominion. His rational judgment, already weakened by the company's internal spiritual chaos, evaporated. He leaned back, his eyes predatory. "Vespera, I can arrange this money, easily, but a favor of this scale, it requires a personal transaction, a deeper arrangement. If you are truly desperate, then you must be willing to accommodate me intimately before I render this financial help." Vespera, playing the part of a broken, cornered woman, agreed. The moment he demanded the transaction, the spiritual binding was complete. It was the ancient binding of the puppeteer, requiring the exchange of the soul's power for a mortal transgression. As they parted, Chief Zane felt a rush of self-satisfaction and power. He had no idea that in the unseen realm, his very essence, his will, his judgment, his ethics, had been drawn out through an ethereal cork and sealed into a small, black, oily spiritual bottle now safely tucked into Vespera's unseen satchel. The chief had become a remote-controlled puppet, his soul caged, his actions dictated by the silent, malicious whispers of the obsidian custodian. The destruction accelerated into financial annihilation. Under Vespera's spiritual command, Chief Zane began signing off on catastrophic, inexplicable financial directives. Massive profit margins from successful oil contracts, funds meant for critical reinvestment and expansion, were systematically rerouted into a complex web of shell accounts that ultimately channeled into Vespera's personal, untraceable holdings. AZ Oil and Gas, the giant of the azimuth, was rapidly being hollowed out, its financial foundation collapsing even as its glass exterior gleamed in the Lagos sun. Far from the destructive currents of the corporate tower, in a quiet neighborhood, lived Stephen. He was a dedicated man of faith who had spent years searching for a job, facing one closed door after another, a period of relentless disappointment that had only deepened his commitment to his prayers. One evening, Exhausted but resolute, Stephen felt a clear, powerful instruction settle in his spirit. It was the Lord's voice, distinct and unmistakable. Your waiting is over. You will be given a strategic role at AZ Oil and Gas. There, you have an assignment to reclaim the ground that has been spiritually stolen. But your covering must be absolute. When you walk through those doors, you must be fasting. Let no worldly substance enter your body while you are on that ground, for it is contaminated, and your discipline must be your armor. Stephen, understanding the spiritual gravity of the instruction, confirmed his commitment instantly. Fasting was not a burden, it was a divine weapon. 4 days later, the miracle happened. AZ Oil and Gas posted an urgent vacancy for a highly specialized resource management strategist, a role perfectly tailored to Stephen's unique skills. The hiring process, normally glacial and political, was impossibly swift and efficient. He received the offer and accepted, sobered by the knowledge that this was not just a job. It was a warfare posting. Stephen walked into the azimuth on his first day, not with the usual jitters of a new hire, but with an inner composure born of spiritual armor. He was hungry, fasting not just from food, but from the spiritual compromises of the world. His presence was like a blinding, burning shockwave to Vespera. Her elaborate network of dark spells felt an immediate, agonizing pressure, screaming with the alarm of a hostile, divinely protected intrusion. That night, Vespera targeted Stephen's workstation with extreme prejudice. She gathered the most toxic spiritual venom in her arsenal, intending to cast the devastating curse of rapid dissolution, a spiritual obliteration spell. She approached his new, functional fabric chair, her hand dripping with the brackish water. As she extended her hand to wipe the seat, her curse struck an invisible, impenetrable wall of light. The dark energy recoiled instantly, not softly, but with a sharp, painful snap that sent a jolt of agonizing fire up her arm. The rag in her hand instantly dried to dust, and the water in her bucket turned to an impotent, clear steam. She stumbled back, genuine fear touching her ancient cold soul. The curse could not stick. The spiritual anchor of the fasting man was sealed. His destiny was protected by a power that invalidated her own. Frantic, Vespera tried the corporate route. She intensified the command on Chief Zane's caged spirit, dismissed Stephen immediately on any pretext. Chief Zane felt the raw, urgent command to fire the new strategist. He began the motion, his lips forming the dismissive words, but the command was met with a stubborn, weak resistance. A small bubble of his former business logic, untouched by the cage, surfaced. Why? He is exactly what we need. Firing him now will disrupt the final contract negotiations. The thought was alien, a flicker of true resistance. He found himself inexplicably stalled, unable to execute the order. Vespera's control, though still strong, was being subtly neutralized by Stephen's proximity and spiritual purity. In a desperate final move, she tried the weapon that had worked before: seduction. She approached Stephen during his quiet break time, which he spent reading his Bible at his clean, untouched desk, his untouched bottle of water the symbol of his dedication. She moved with a calculated, alluring grace, projecting the full, powerful spirit of lust and temptation. "Stephen," she purred, her voice low and intoxicating, designed to appeal to the highest vanity and deepest appetite. "You are different. We need people like you at the top. Let's discuss your future and my gratitude. Privately, I can ensure your success." Stephen looked up, his gaze clear, calm, and utterly unswayed. He saw past the desperate woman, past the seductive lure, and saw the cold, terrified malignancy behind the eyes. His spiritual rejection was absolute. "Vespera," he replied, his voice soft but resonating with the immovable authority of his faith. "I am here on divine assignment. My success is not predicated on your offers, but on my fidelity. What you offer is a chain. I am already free. She fled, her power utterly useless, her confidence shattered. That night, Stephen knelt, not in confusion, but in powerful conviction. He knew the resistance was spiritual warfare. He needed the final marching orders. The Lord responded, not with a whisper, but with a blazing, undeniable revelation. Stephen saw the entire network of spiritual destruction, the black shroud around the azimuth, the precise location of the spells, the spiritual fetters on his colleagues, and the sickening image of Chief Zane's bottled soul. He saw Vespera's ancient true form, a gaunt, malevolent entity, holding the cage. God showed him the method of attack, confrontation, and termination. Stephen walked into the office the next morning, still fasting, but burning with a quiet, righteous authority. He was no longer a strategist. He was an executioner of judgment. He sat at his desk and immediately used his internal communications to request the facility's cleaner be sent to his office. Vespera, driven by a sliver of hope that her seduction had merely been delayed, walked to his office with a false eagerness, convinced that Stephen was coming to claim his part of the spoils. She was blind to the spiritual fire waiting for her. She found Stephen standing behind his desk. He did not speak in anger or accusation, but with the cold, unyielding certainty of a judge reading a final sentence. "Vespera," Stephen declared, his voice ringing with spiritual command. "The Lord God Almighty, the creator of all realms, has passed judgment on your work at AZ Oil and Gas. You came to sow destruction, to steal the will of men, and to bind the fortunes of this company to the pit." He pointed, not with his finger, but with the full, unwavering force of his spirit. "Your tenure here is over. The power that sustains your earthly form and the limb that you use to glide silently through these halls to cast your venomous spells, I command it to be broken and disabled in the name of the living God." The effect was instantaneous, brutal, and horrifying. Vespera's right leg, the one she had used for her silent, spectral movements, buckled with a sickening, audible crack. She fell to the polished marble floor, the plain mask of her face dissolving into a raw, ancient expression of pain and total defeat. She was no longer screaming in a human voice, but with the high, desperate shriek of a vanquished dark power. "I confess! Egibami. Help me. I will confess. I will tell everything. The chief. The money. Everything." The confession that poured from Vespera was a detailed, agonizing catalogue of her wickedness. The aura of discord on Segun's chair, the hex of the vanishing purse that drove Ngozi into debt, the shadow of stagnation that was destroying Tunde, and the absolute spiritual bondage of Chief Zane. The confession was the final key, the spiritual covenant reversed by forced truth. The entire network of dark spells across the 40 floors snapped instantly. In his corner office, Chief Zane gasped, physically shaking as the spirit of lust and vanity was violently expelled. He felt a profound, horrifying clarity and the cold weight of his ethical failures. He stared at the fraudulent transfer documents, his hands trembling. The spiritual bottle was shattered. Across the offices, a wave of spiritual cleansing washed through the floors. Segun Adekunle felt the irrational fury lift, replaced by a deep, urgent wave of love for his wife, and he immediately called her to apologize. Ngozi Okafor's mind cleared, and she instantly understood the mechanism of the money diversion and the steps required to trace and secure the company's funds. Tunde Lawal felt the debilitating fever break, replaced by a rush of vital energy, and the solution to a critical procurement crisis flashed into his mind. Stephen stood over the defeated entity. "The judgment is executed. Your reign is over. Leave this place and never return." Vespera dragged herself away, a broken, limping figure, howling a final defeated curse under her breath. She made it to the service elevator, her physical form now unstable. A security camera captured her entering the elevator, and in the next frame, the elevator was empty. She had dissolved, banished back to the void from which she came, leaving behind only a faint metallic chill in the air. Z Oil and Gas was profoundly shaken. The chief, having experienced a near-death spiritual encounter, was completely transformed. He immediately moved to reverse the illegal transfers, using Vespera's full confession as the basis for a complete internal and spiritual audit. Recognizing that the company's near collapse was due to a failure to acknowledge and guard against spiritual realities, the board and the grateful chief Alistair Zane took an unprecedented step. Stephen, the man whose faith and discipline had saved the entire corporation, was instantly promoted far beyond his initial role. In an official internal memo that stunned the Nigerian corporate world, Stephen was appointed as a non-executive director. His title was unique and groundbreaking: Non-Executive Director of Spiritual Integrity and Staff Welfare Oversight. His new mandate was to instill a culture of spiritual vigilance, implementing daily non-denominational prayer gatherings, ensuring staff welfare committees addressed holistic rather than just material needs, and holding a final symbolic sign-off on all major investment decisions to ensure they were free from spiritual bondage or avarice. Stephen's assignment was complete, and his reward was a position that institutionalized the lesson that true success is impossible without God. The profound story of the AZ Oil and Gas assignment serves as an eternal warning, particularly within the ambitious, high-stakes environment of the modern city. We are often deceived into believing that our professional lives are governed solely by our certificates, our intellect, and our hustle. We forget that the most significant battles for our careers, our marriages, and our finances are fought in the spiritual realm, often by unseen enemies operating in the most unassuming roles. Stephen's victory was not achieved by technical skill or corporate politics, but by absolute spiritual discipline. His commitment to fasting was his armor, creating a wall of consecration that Vespera's most potent charms could not penetrate. The moral lesson is clear for every person navigating the workplace, whether in a cubicle or a corner office. Be prayerful, be vigilant, put God first. Always guard your spiritual gates, for the enemy seeks to use the mundane, the office chair, the desk, the pursuit of money, as anchors for destruction. By maintaining spiritual integrity and discipline, we ensure that we do not become victims of the attacks by known or unknown enemies, and that our destinies, like the revived fortunes of AZ Oil and Gas, remain under divine protection. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment below to tell us what you think about the story.